stop. Before you read one more word, answer this honestly. When was the last time you felt truly unstoppable? Not lucky. Not motivated for a day or two after listening to a podcast in the car. Genuinely, deeply, unshakably unstoppable. Like nothing life threw at you could knock you off course. Like you were operating from a place so grounded, so clear, so absolutely certain of your own capability that circumstances lost their power to rattle you. If you had to pause before answering that question, this book was written for you. Right now, at this very second, your mind is executing thousands of operations simultaneously. It is sorting data, generating predictions, regulating your heartbeat, scanning for threats, and quietly deciding what you will do next, all without your permission, all beneath the surface of your awareness. Here is what almost nobody ever tells you. You are not the one running most of this process. Your brain is running you. And unless you learn to reverse that dynamic with precision and intention, it will keep running you straight into the same walls, the same patterns, the same frustrating outcomes that have kept you from the life you know somewhere deep down you are genuinely capable of living. This is not a motivational speech. This is a manual. Inside these pages, you will find a precise, science-backed, field-tested system that elite performers across America, from Silicon Valley founders to Navy SEALs, from professional athletes to boardroom executives to artists at the top of their craft, have used to seize control of their minds and build results that look, to everyone watching from the outside, like impossible talent or extraordinary luck. It is not talent. It never was. It is mental training. And the gap between people who have it and people who do not is not fixed by genetics, by upbringing, or by circumstance. It is bridged by knowledge, by practice, and by the commitment to show up for that practice daily, even when, especially when, it is inconvenient. By the time you finish this book, the way you think, focus, regulate your emotions, make decisions, and execute on what matters most will never be the same again. That is not a sales promise. That is a biological fact about what happens when a human brain is given the right inputs consistently over time. The process is called neuroplasticity, and it begins right now. The performance gap. Nobody talks about. There is a gap in America, and it has nothing to do with income, zip code, education, family background, or any of the conventional explanations people reach for when they try to understand why some people thrive and others struggle. It is a mental performance gap, and it is the single greatest dividing line between people who reach the top of their potential and everyone else who watches from below, telling themselves a story about circumstances. Look at the highest performers in any field you respect. The entrepreneurs who build companies from a kitchen table into a billion-dollar brand. The athletes who come back from career-ending injuries to win championships that nobody believed were possible. The leaders who navigate impossible crises with calm, decisive clarity, while everyone around them either freezes or panics. The artists who produce work decade after decade that moves people in ways that transcend trend. What do they share? It is not a genius IQ. Research consistently shows that IQ accounts for roughly 25% of variance in professional outcomes. Meaningful, yes, but far from determinative. It is not a privileged upbringing. The biographies of the most accomplished Americans are filled with extraordinary poverty, adversity, and disadvantage overcome. It is not even talent in the conventional sense, because talent without the mental infrastructure to deploy it consistently produces people who peak early and plateau permanently. What these people share, confirmed by study after study from Harvard, Stanford, and every major performance research institution in the world, is mental performance. the capacity to regulate their own thoughts and emotions under pressure, the ability to maintain focus when the environment is conspiring against it, the mental resilience to fail, adjust, and persist rather than fail and quit, the strategic clarity to see the right moves when everyone else sees only chaos. These are not personality traits you were born with. They are trained capacities, and the difference between those who have them and those who do not is simply whether they have been trained. Meanwhile, the overwhelming majority of people in this country are operating at a fraction of their actual capability. They wake up exhausted from sleep that never fully restored them. They drift through reactive days, bouncing between notifications, obligations, and the low-grade anxiety of a to-do list that never gets shorter. They set goals in January with genuine enthusiasm and abandon them by February with genuine resignation. They know exactly what they should be doing. Eat better, move more, start the business, have the conversation, make the change, and they still do not do it. This is not laziness. It is the inevitable output of an untrained mind running the wrong program. The information problem is solved. Americans have more access to knowledge, courses, podcasts, coaching, and advice than any generation in human history. The shelves and servers are overflowing with answers. The problem is the gap between knowing and doing, between intention and execution, between understanding what success requires and actually building the neural infrastructure that makes that success your automatic default. That gap is not filled by more information. It is filled by mental discipline. The kind that is built deliberately, systematically, and consistently, the same way an Olympic athlete builds physical conditioning without expecting it to happen by accident. Think about what that actually means in practice. The mental performance gap is not an abstraction. It shows up every single day in the texture of your decisions. It is present in the moment you choose to take the difficult phone call instead of letting it go to voicemail for the third time. It is present when you choose to begin the intimidating project instead of rearranging your desk. It is present at 6 a.m. when you decide whether the person you are committed to becoming gets out of bed on schedule or negotiates 5 more minutes that become 40. The gap is not located in big moments. It lives in small ones, and its compound effect over months and years determines everything. What makes the mental performance gap so consequential is that it is self-reinforcing in both directions. People who train their minds perform better, which builds confidence, which makes them more likely to take on challenging opportunities, which produces more evidence of capability, which further strengthens their self-concept, which generates even better performance. Meanwhile, people who do not train their minds underperform, which erodes confidence, which triggers avoidance of challenges, which produces fewer growth opportunities, which deepens the conviction that they are limited, which produces even worse performance. The gap widens on its own, automatically, because the underlying dynamic is compounding. The only way to stop it compounding in the wrong direction is to change the underlying dynamic, which is exactly what mental training does. This book closes that gap, chapter by chapter, tool by tool. It gives you everything you need to go from running on autopilot to running at full power. The competitive edge has always been available to you. You just needed the right training system to claim it. The hidden operating system. Imagine discovering that your smartphone has been running a hidden operating system, one installed before you ever touched the device, written by people you never met, optimizing for goals you never chose. That determines which apps open easily, which calls get through, and which messages you never even see. You have been using the phone for years, assuming you were in control. But the hidden OS has been making the real decisions the entire time, and most of your choices have been downstream of its programming. That is a near-perfect description of your subconscious mind. And understanding how it works is the single most important intellectual breakthrough available to any human being serious about performing at the level of their actual potential. Here are the numbers that should stop you cold. Your subconscious mind processes approximately 11 million bits of information per second. Your conscious mind, the part you identify as you, the voice narrating your inner life, the part reading these words right now, processes approximately 40 bits per second. That means roughly 99.9996% of your mental processing is happening beneath the surface of your awareness, outside your control, running programs you did not consciously choose and have probably never examined. Those programs were written early in your life, when your brain was in its most impressionable developmental phase. Children under the age of 7 spend the majority of their waking hours in theta brainwave states, the same semi-hypnotic state that adults enter during light sleep, which means their subconscious is essentially open to direct programming without the filtering of critical analysis. Every lesson absorbed from a parent, every message received from a teacher, every conclusion drawn from falling down and being told whether to get back up or cry. Every story your culture told about what people from your background can accomplish. All of this went directly into the subconscious operating system, written in deep code, long before you were old enough to evaluate any of it. The result is an invisible filter through which you perceive every single moment of your life. This filter decides which opportunities you notice and which ones slide right past you without registering. It determines which conversations energize you and which ones drain you before they begin. It shapes your automatic response to risk, to criticism, to unfamiliar challenges, to authority, to intimacy, to failure. And it does all of this before your conscious mind even knows something happened. By the time you are consciously aware of a reaction, the subconscious has already processed the situation, generated the response, and begun executing it in your body. This is why willpower is such a devastatingly fragile strategy for change. When you decide, consciously, deliberately, with every good intention, to override a deep pattern, you are working with roughly 40 bits of processing power per second. Your subconscious, running the counter program, is working with 11 million. The math explains why most New Year's resolutions collapse within weeks. Why intelligent, motivated professionals keep repeating the same self-defeating behaviors year after year, despite genuinely wanting to change. Why people who understand nutritional science intellectually still binge on comfort food under stress. Conscious intention, fighting subconscious programming, loses almost every time. One of the most striking demonstrations of how subconscious programming shapes reality comes from research on priming effects in human behavior. In a landmark series of experiments, researchers found that subjects who were exposed to words associated with elderly people, words like wrinkled, gray, slow, subsequently walked more slowly down a hallway after leaving the experiment than subjects who had not been exposed to those words. They were not told to walk slowly. They did not consciously decide to walk slowly. Their subconscious, activated by the priming, generated the behavior automatically. This is happening in your life continuously. Your subconscious is being primed by everything you consume, everyone you spend time with, and every environment you inhabit. And it is generating behavior in response without consulting your conscious preferences. Understanding this is not cause for anxiety. It is cause for curation. The most practical implication of understanding your hidden operating system is this. If you want to change your behavior sustainably, the most efficient path is not to fight your subconscious programming with conscious willpower. It is to change the programming itself. This means changing the inputs your subconscious receives. The stories you tell yourself about who you are, the environments you inhabit, and the automatic cues they generate. The people whose beliefs and behaviors your mirror neurons are constantly absorbing. The content you consume in the windows when your subconscious is most receptive. Every one of these is a programming input, and every one of them is, to a significant degree, within your control. The question is not whether your subconscious is being programmed. It is always being programmed. The question is whether you are doing the programming or outsourcing it to chance. The goal of every technique in this book is to give you the specific tools to perform that upgrade, chapter by chapter, practice by practice, until the mind that was once your greatest obstacle becomes your greatest competitive advantage. The comfort zone is a cage, not a cocoon. There is a word America loves: comfort. Comfortable homes, comfortable income, comfortable routines, comfortable relationships. The entire consumer economy is built around the delivery of comfort in increasingly frictionless forms. And yet, for anyone paying honest attention to the data of their own life, the evidence is inescapable. The pursuit of comfort at the expense of growth is the most reliable path to a life that looks safe from the outside and feels suffocating from the inside. Your comfort zone is not a safe haven. It is a cage, one with invisible bars, padded walls, and a convincing interior design that makes it possible to spend decades inside it without ever recognizing the confinement. The reason most people never escape is not that the door is locked. It is that the cage has been so cleverly designed to feel like home that the question, what is on the other side of this wall, stops arising. Neuroscience explains the mechanism with precise clarity. Your nervous system is built for survival, not for achievement. Its primary function is not to maximize your potential. It is to keep you alive tomorrow. And your brain, being metabolically expensive and evolutionarily conservative, has learned to flag anything unfamiliar as potentially threatening. Every time you approach the edge of your comfort zone, when you consider taking a meaningful risk, speaking an uncomfortable truth in a high-stakes situation, launching something you have been afraid to launch, or pursuing a goal that exposes you to the possibility of very public failure, your amygdala fires a threat response identical in neurological character to the one your ancestors experienced when they heard a predator in the dark. Cortisol floods your system. Your heart rate elevates. Your thinking narrows toward the immediate and the concrete. And your mind, clever, eloquent, utterly self-serving in this moment, generates an extraordinarily convincing list of reasons why this particular moment is not quite right. The timing is off. You need more preparation. The risk is greater than it appears. The people who have tried before you have mostly failed. And besides, things are not so bad right here, right now, in the familiar. What makes this so dangerous is that the feeling generated by this threat response is neurologically indistinguishable from the feeling of actual danger. Your body does not know the difference between a predator and a pitch meeting, between a cliff edge and a cold call conversation. Both activate the same biological alarm system, which means the internal experience of approaching your growth edge, that knot in the stomach, that voice saying not yet, is not actually telling you that the path is wrong. It is telling you that the path is new. And new is exactly where all growth lives. Consider the moments in your life where you felt most genuinely alive, where something in you ignited, where you were fully present in a way that ordinary days rarely produce. Did those moments happen inside your comfort zone? Or did they happen when you took a leap, when you challenged yourself, when you risked something real, When you stepped into the unknown and came out the other side with a version of yourself you did not know existed before you made the crossing? There is a specific language the comfort zone uses that is worth learning to recognize, because once you hear it clearly, you can no longer mistake it for wisdom. It speaks in absolutes and universals. I could never do something like that. That kind of thing only works for certain kinds of people. The timing is wrong. It will be better when things settle down. I need to be more prepared before I can try something that significant. Each of these statements contains a kernel of legitimate concern wrapped in an illegitimate conclusion. Yes, timing matters. Yes, preparation matters. Yes, some things are genuinely not right for some people. But the comfort zone takes those grains of truth and inflates them into walls, and then convinces you that the walls are made of stone when they are actually made of thought. The antidote to the comfort zone is not recklessness, and it is not the performance of bravado. It is the steady, deliberate practice of choosing discomfort intentionally, in progressively larger doses, with full awareness of what you are doing and why. This practice, often called voluntary hardship by Stoic philosophers and stress inoculation by modern performance psychologists, serves two functions simultaneously. It builds actual capability in the domain you are practicing, and it builds meta-capability, the proven evidence inscribed in your nervous system through direct experience that you can tolerate more discomfort than you previously thought, that the feeling of being outside your comfort zone does not mean something is going wrong, and that the version of you that exists on the other side of that discomfort is worth every second of the crossing. The cage does not disappear the first time you step out of it, but it gets smaller every time you do. And one day, you look around and realize the door was never locked. You just had to decide to walk through it. 3 traps that quietly destroy your potential. Most people who fail to reach their potential do not fail loudly or dramatically. They fail quietly, gradually, through a process so incremental that it is possible to spend an entire career, an entire life, inside it without ever recognizing it for what it is. They fall into one of 3 traps so cleverly disguised as productive behavior that intelligent, motivated, genuinely hardworking people get caught in them repeatedly, decade after decade, without ever understanding why the results they are working so hard to produce remain stubbornly out of reach. The first trap is the research spiral. This is the seductive belief that you need just a little more information before you can begin. One more book, one more course, one more mentor's perspective, one more month of market research. The research spiral feels indistinguishable from diligence because learning is genuinely valuable and more preparation does genuinely reduce certain risks. The problem is that at some point, and that point arrives far sooner than the research spiral allows you to believe, additional research stops adding real readiness and starts substituting for the action that is the only path to actual readiness. The University of Chicago published research showing that novice surgeons who perform more procedures in their first year significantly outperform those who spent more time in academic preparation before operating. The same pattern holds across virtually every domain: law, entrepreneurship, writing, athletics, investing, teaching, leadership. Skill is built through iteration, not accumulation. The person who attempts something imperfectly and fails learns things that no book or course can teach. And the person who waits to feel ready before attempting is, by definition, waiting for something that acting is the only way to produce. The second trap is the perfection delay. You will not launch the business until the website is flawless. You will not post the content until the production quality is professional enough. You will not apply for the role until your credentials are unassailable. You will not have the conversation until the timing is perfect. Meanwhile, your competitors ship imperfect versions that real customers actually use, improve from that feedback, and iterate into something genuinely excellent, while you are still polishing version 0. Perfection is not a standard. It is a fear response wearing a quality control costume. The fear underneath it is real. Fear of judgment, of failure, of the exposure that comes from putting something genuine into the world and finding out that the world is indifferent to it. But the strategy it generates, endless refinement, perpetual, almost ready, permanent, not quite yet, produces a form of failure so quiet and gradual that it can be mistaken for prudence until the window closes entirely. Every successful product, company, book, relationship, and career in human history started imperfect and improved. The market does not reward the most polished idea. It rewards the idea that showed up. The third trap is attention fragmentation. You sit down to work on the one project that would genuinely change your trajectory. Within 4 minutes, you check your phone, then your email. Then a news headline catches your eye, which pulls you into an article, which has a link to a video, which has a comment that infuriates you. And suddenly 23 minutes have disappeared, and you have to spend another 8 minutes finding your way back to the cognitive state the project requires. This is not a personal discipline failure. This is an engineered outcome. The major technology platforms of this era employ teams of neuroscientists, behavioral economists, and machine learning engineers whose professional mandate is to make their products maximally addictive. Your attention is the product being extracted. Your focus, the raw material of everything meaningful you have ever built or ever will build, is the resource being strip-mined by systems 1,000 times more sophisticated than your individual willpower. The consequence is not merely lost hours. It is the structural degradation of your capacity for the kind of deep, sustained, cognitively demanding work that produces breakthrough results. Every capitulation to a notification, every task switch, every dopamine reward from a like or a share trains your neural circuitry to require higher stimulation and tolerate less frustration. The attention span required for complex thinking, creative synthesis, and strategic planning atrophies from disuse exactly the way a muscle atrophies from inactivity. And by the time most people recognize what has happened, years of capability have quietly eroded. Recognizing these 3 traps with honest clarity is the first act of genuine liberation. You cannot dismantle a prison you refuse to see. Your brain is not finished. The neuroplasticity revolution. For most of the 20th century, mainstream neuroscience operated on a deeply limiting assumption that shaped everything from clinical treatment of brain injuries to popular beliefs about human potential. The adult human brain was essentially fixed. Whatever neural architecture you had developed by your mid-20s was, more or less, what you were working with for the rest of your life. Your personality, your cognitive tendencies, your emotional default settings. These were understood to be hardwired features of a finished product. That assumption was wrong. Profoundly, consequentially, irreversibly, life-changingly wrong. And the correction of that error may be the single most important scientific development of the past 50 years for anyone who cares about human potential. The discovery of neuroplasticity, your brain's capacity to physically reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout your entire lifespan, began reshaping neuroscience in the 1960s and became impossible to dispute as brain imaging technology made the process visible in real time. Modern fMRI and PET scan technology has documented something that would have been considered science fiction a generation ago. The structure of your brain changes in direct, measurable response to how you think, what you practice, and the experiences you consistently expose yourself to. not metaphorically, not approximately, measurably. You can watch it happen. Researchers at University College London documented that professional taxi drivers, who must memorize the complete non-grid street layout of one of the world's most complex cities as part of their licensing requirement, developed measurably enlarged hippocampal regions compared to non-drivers. The hippocampus, the brain region most centrally involved in spatial navigation and memory, literally grew in direct response to navigational practice, not in young drivers. In adults of all ages, musicians who spend years in intensive instrument practice show increased gray matter density in the motor cortex and auditory processing areas. Adults who learn to juggle showed measurable structural brain changes within just a few weeks of practice. And those changes reversed when practice stopped, confirming that it was the practice, not some pre-existing trait, driving the transformation. The implications for your life are not abstract. Every perceived limitation you currently carry, the tendency toward anxiety that has followed you for years, the struggle with confidence in certain situations, the difficulty sustaining focus on demanding work, the emotional reactivity you have tried and failed to control through willpower alone. These are not permanent features of who you are. They are the current state of a physical system that is continuously actively remodeling itself in response to input. They are the output of neural pathways that have been reinforced through repetition. And what repetition built, different repetition can rebuild. The principle at the heart of this process is captured in a foundational axiom. Neurons that fire together wire together. Every time a particular sequence of thoughts, emotions, or behaviors is activated, the neural connections supporting that sequence become incrementally stronger, faster to activate, more automatic in their execution, requiring less conscious initiation. This is how habits are physically encoded in the brain. This is how beliefs solidify from tentative interpretations into absolute certainties. This is how patterns that once required effort become, over time, the default response to a given context. The time frame for neuroplastic change is one of the most misunderstood aspects of this process, and misunderstanding it is one of the most common reasons people abandon their mental training before the results arrive. The popular notion that it takes 21 days to form a new habit, a figure derived from a decades-old misreading of a plastic surgeon's observation about phantom limb adaptation, has no basis in the neuroscience of habit formation. Actual research, including the most cited study on the subject from University College London, found that habit automaticity develops anywhere from 18 days to 254 days, depending on the behavior's complexity and the individual. The average in that study was 66 days. This means that for many meaningful behavioral changes, you will not feel any sense of automaticity for 2 months or more of consistent practice. And yet the neurological change is occurring throughout, whether you can feel it or not. This is why the most important cognitive reframe in all of mental training is the shift from results-based feedback to process-based feedback. If you evaluate your mental training by whether it feels natural yet, or whether your results have obviously improved, you will likely quit before the change becomes visible, because the neurological change precedes the perceptible change, sometimes by weeks. The professional who practices intentional self-talk every morning for 40 days without obvious effect and concludes the practice does not work has stopped exactly at the moment when the neural pathway was approaching consolidation. The professional who continues for 60 days suddenly discovers that the old self-defeating narrative no longer activates automatically in difficult situations, and realizes that the previous 40 days of ineffective practice were actually the essential infrastructure for the breakthrough that just arrived. Your brain is not your biography. It is not your destiny. It is your instrument, the most sophisticated instrument in the known universe, and it is waiting right now for instructions about what to become. Daily mental conditioning, the non-negotiable foundation. You would never expect a professional athlete to compete at an elite level without a structured, progressive daily training regimen. You would never expect a concert pianist to perform flawlessly at Carnegie Hall on the basis of occasional practice whenever they felt motivated. Yet most people expect to perform at the top of their mental game, navigating complex decisions under pressure, sustaining creative focus through difficulty, managing intense emotional stress without losing clarity, and executing consistently on what matters most, with zero deliberate mental training. The gap between that expectation and reality explains most of the frustration in most people's professional and personal lives. Daily mental conditioning is the foundational practice that makes everything else in this book possible. It is the infrastructure, the morning warm-up before the day's performance, the invisible work that produces the visible results, and its power lives entirely in one principle: consistency, not in occasional grand efforts, not in intense retreats followed by months of neglect, in the compounding effect of small daily investments made without exception, even when, especially when, you do not feel like making them. The architecture of an effective mental conditioning practice has 4 core components, each targeting a different layer of your mental performance. The first component is intentional priming. Before your environment has a chance to set the agenda, before the news cycle, the email inbox, the social media feed, the first demanding message of the morning, and the ambient noise of modern life flood your attention, you need to deliberately install the program you want running today. This means deciding in advance and with specificity, not just what you need to accomplish, but who you are choosing to be in the accomplishing of it. What qualities of mind will you bring to this day? What level of focus? What emotional tone? What response will you choose when the inevitable friction and difficulty arrive? You decide this before the day starts, because if you do not write today's program, yesterday's runs automatically. And yesterday's program, with all of its accumulated anxiety, reactive patterns, and unexamined defaults, was probably not optimized for peak performance. The second component is mental visualization, one of the most misunderstood and underutilized tools in the entire performance science toolkit. Visualization is not daydreaming about outcomes. It is a deliberate neurological rehearsal process, the systematic mental pre-living of the performance you want to execute in full sensory detail, with genuine emotional engagement. Research from the Cleveland Clinic Foundation found that subjects who mentally rehearsed physical movements, with no physical exercise, showed muscle strength gains of up to 35%. Studies from Stanford's sports psychology program documented that athletes who incorporated vivid mental rehearsal into their pre-competition preparation perform more consistently under pressure than equally talented athletes who relied solely on physical preparation. Your brain at the neurological level does not fully distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. When you practice performing at your peak, seeing it, feeling it, hearing it, engaging every sense, you are training the neural pathways that will execute that performance when the real situation arrives. The third component is intentional self-talk, the disciplined management of the internal monologue that is running continuously inside your mind. Every statement you make to yourself, regardless of whether you say it aloud or merely think it, is being processed by your subconscious as an instruction about your identity and your capability. "I always fall apart under pressure" is not a neutral observation. It is a command to your subconscious. Match this. "I execute at my best when the stakes are highest" is equally a command. Match this. The words you use to describe yourself to yourself spoken or thought with consistent repetition and emotional conviction, become the operating instructions of your performance. Effective, intentional self-talk is present tense, specific, and emotionally genuine. Not, "I hope to be more disciplined someday." That is a wish about the future that your subconscious registers as confirming a gap between where you are and where you want to be. Instead, I bring complete discipline to the work that matters most to my mission right now. Not, "I'll try to stay calm under pressure," but "I am grounded, clear, and effective under pressure." The difference feels small on the surface. Neurologically, it is enormous. The fourth component is environmental protection, the deliberate curation of what you allow into your mind during the windows when your subconscious is most receptive to programming. Research on hypnagogic and hypnopompic states, the transitions into and out of sleep, confirms that these are periods of dramatically increased neurological suggestibility. The first 30 minutes after waking and the last 30 minutes before sleeping are your mind's prime programming windows. What enters your mind during those windows is written in deeper ink than what enters at other times of day. Most Americans spend these windows surrendering their minds to content optimized for engagement, outrage, and dependency. Reclaiming them for intentional conditioning is one of the highest leverage changes available to you. One dimension of daily mental conditioning that is rarely discussed but profoundly impactful is the practice of deliberate recovery. High performers in every domain have learned that the quality of their recovery determines the quality of their next performance cycle, as much as the quality of the effort itself. Mental conditioning is not just about what you put in. It is also about what you deliberately allow to rest. Scheduling periods of genuine mental downtime, not passive distraction, but true quiet, whether through nature walks, stillness, creative activities without performance pressure, or simply unhurried reflection, is not an indulgence. It is the neurological equivalent of sleep, the window in which the brain consolidates what it has learned, clears metabolic waste products that accumulate during intensive cognitive work, and rebuilds the attentional and emotional resources that peak performance demands. The most consistently excellent performers are rarely the ones who work the most hours. They are the ones who work the best hours and rest with the same intentionality they bring to their work. Finally, the most important long-term discipline of daily mental conditioning is tracking. What gets measured gets managed, and the mind, unlike the body, where a scale or a mirror provides immediate feedback, requires deliberate record-keeping to make progress visible across the gradual arc of neurological change. Keep a simple daily log. What was your mental conditioning practice today? What was the quality of your focus during your most demanding work? What was the emotional tone of your inner experience? What limiting patterns did you notice, and what did you do with them? Reviewing this log weekly reveals patterns you would never notice in the daily blur, and those patterns are your most precise roadmap for where the next level of your development lies. Focus mastery, reclaiming the most valuable resource you own. In the knowledge economy of the 21st century, there is one resource more valuable than capital, more scarce than time, and more aggressively sought after by every corporation, platform, algorithm, and institution operating at scale. Your focused attention. Not just your attention in the passive sense, the background awareness that registers everything in your peripheral experience, but your focused attention. The directed, sustained, high-intensity cognitive beam that you are capable of pointing at something and holding there for extended periods. That is what produces insight. That is what produces mastery. That is what produces the kind of work that actually changes things. And it is under systematic attack. The average American adult switches between digital tasks or devices every 47 seconds during working hours, according to landmark research from the University of California, Irvine. After each interruption, the same research found, it takes an average of 23 minutes and 15 seconds to fully return to the depth of cognitive engagement the task required before the distraction. Apply those numbers to a typical American workday, and you begin to understand something that productivity metrics have been documenting for years, but that most people have been too distracted to process. We are doing enormous amounts of activity and producing a fraction of the meaningful output we are capable of. Focus is not merely one component of mental performance. It is the multiplier. Every other cognitive capacity you possess, intelligence, creativity, strategic thinking, emotional intelligence, technical expertise, produces results that are directly proportional to the quality of attention you can bring to bear. Extraordinary intelligence with scattered attention produces ordinary results. Ordinary intelligence with extraordinary focus produces extraordinary results. This is why the most successful and impactful people in any field are not always the most naturally gifted. They are the ones who have learned to aim. Rebuilding your capacity for deep, sustained focus follows the same principles as rebuilding any atrophied physical capacity. Progressive resistance, consistent practice, adequate recovery, and honest measurement of progress over time. Environmental architecture is the foundation because your focus capacity is far more dependent on your surroundings than most people want to believe. A phone on your desk, face down, silent, not glanced at, reduces performance on demanding cognitive tasks by approximately 10%, according to research from the University of Texas at Austin. Not because you are checking it, because the background awareness of its presence consumes attentional resources as your brain allocates processing to the ongoing task of not checking it. The solution is not self-control. It is removing the device from the physical environment entirely during periods of focused work. The practice of rebuilding your attention span begins with deliberate, timed intervals of single-task focus. 25 uninterrupted minutes on one task, followed by a genuine 5-minute rest with no digital input. This is a starting point, not a destination. Each time you notice your mind beginning to wander during a focus interval, gently redirect it back to the task without self-judgment. That redirection, that noticing and returning, is not a failure. It is the exercise itself. It is the neurological equivalent of a repetition. Each one builds capacity, and over weeks of consistent practice, the intervals lengthen, the wandering becomes less frequent, and the depth of engagement accessible to you deepens in ways that produce a qualitatively different quality of thinking. Single tasking deserves specific attention because it runs so directly counter to a cultural myth that American professional culture has promoted for decades. Multitasking, the idea that performing multiple tasks simultaneously represents a sophisticated and productive use of cognitive resources, has been comprehensively dismantled by neuroscience research. What human beings actually do when they appear to multitask is not parallel processing. It is rapid sequential task switching, and each switch carries a significant cognitive cost. The time required to disengage from one task's neural context, reorient to the new task's requirements, and rebuild the depth of engagement the previous task demanded. A study from Stanford found that people who frequently multitask are actually worse at filtering irrelevant information, worse at managing their working memory, and worse at switching between tasks than people who rarely multitask, suggesting that the practice degrades the very capabilities it purports to exercise. The practical implication is straightforward. The most productive work session is not the one that covers the most ground in terms of tasks touched, but the one that achieves the deepest engagement with the most important work. A 90-minute block of complete, uninterrupted focus on a single meaningful project will typically produce more genuine progress, more insight, more quality output, more creative connection making than a full day of fragmented attention distributed across many activities. The counterintuitive truth of focus mastery is that doing less simultaneously produces more over time, because depth of engagement is what generates the cognitive outputs that actually matter: original thinking, complex synthesis, genuine problem solving, and the kind of creative work that cannot be produced by someone who is perpetually context switching. The state that represents the highest expression of focus mastery is what psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi called flow. Complete absorption in a challenging, meaningful task where self-consciousness dissolves, time perception distorts, and performance reaches effortless peak levels. Flow is not luck or inspiration. It is an engineered state, produced reliably by specific conditions, clear and specific goals for the session, immediate and legible feedback on progress, and a challenge level calibrated precisely to the edge of your current capability. These conditions can be deliberately designed, and when they are, you gain consistent access to the cognitive state where your most important work is produced. Emotional regulation, the skill that separates good from great. Here is a finding from the performance research literature that runs counter to nearly everything most Americans are taught in school, in business training, and in popular success culture. Your emotional intelligence, specifically your ability to recognize, understand, and regulate your own emotional states, is a more reliable predictor of your long-term professional and personal outcomes than your IQ, your technical expertise, or the quality of your strategy. This is not a soft skills argument. It is a hard performance argument backed by data collected over decades from tens of thousands of people across every sector and role level. The mechanism is neurological. When you encounter a stressful or high-stakes stimulus, a difficult conversation, an unexpected failure, criticism of your work, a major setback, that information reaches your amygdala, the brain's threat processing center, approximately 200 milliseconds before it reaches your prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for rational analysis, strategic thinking, impulse control, and the clear evaluation of options. That 200 millisecond window is where your emotional reaction forms, completely outside your conscious control, before your rational mind has any input whatsoever. When the amygdala determines that a threat is significant, it does not merely generate a feeling. It initiates a cascade of hormonal and neurological responses: cortisol and adrenaline release, increased heart rate, narrowed attentional focus, suppressed prefrontal function, that are designed to optimize you for immediate physical threat response. This system evolved over hundreds of thousands of years for survival in a physical world, is exquisitely well designed for escaping predators. It is profoundly ill-designed for navigating performance reviews, boardroom disagreements, difficult parenting moments, or the complex social and professional challenges that define most modern high-stakes situations. An amygdala hijack, the state in which your emotional response has overwhelmed your rational processing, is not a character flaw. It is the wrong operating system being applied to the wrong problem. Emotional regulation does not mean emotional suppression. Suppressing emotions is both physiologically damaging. It correlates with elevated cardiovascular risk, compromised immune function, and accelerated cognitive decline, and strategically counterproductive because your emotions carry genuine information about your values, boundaries, priorities, and needs. The goal is not to feel less. It is to develop the space between the feeling and the response, to widen the gap between stimulus and action sufficiently to choose your response rather than simply enacting your reaction. The first practical tool for widening that gap is emotional labeling with precision. Research led by neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman at UCLA demonstrated that accurately naming an emotional state, not just "I'm upset," but "I'm experiencing shame about this specific aspect of what happened," and underneath that there's fear about how this will be perceived, reduces amygdala activation and increases prefrontal cortex engagement. The act of precise labeling literally shifts your brain's processing from the reactive system to the reasoning system, giving you access to your full cognitive capability in the moment when you need it most. The second tool is physiological intervention, which works faster than any cognitive technique because it directly addresses the body chemistry driving the emotional state. Stanford neuroscientist Andrew Huberman has documented the effectiveness of a specific breathing pattern. A double inhale through the nose, fully inflating the lungs, followed by a long, slow exhale through the mouth, in rapidly activating the parasympathetic nervous system, reducing heart rate, and restoring prefrontal function. This technique can shift your emotional state from reactive to regulated within 60 to 90 seconds. It works in a meeting room. It works before a difficult conversation. It works in any moment where you feel your emotional state moving toward territory that will not serve you. The third tool is systematic reframing, the practiced art of questioning your initial interpretation of a situation and deliberately generating alternative perspectives that are equally valid but more constructive. Your emotional response is never to what actually happened. It is to the story your mind constructed about what happened in the fraction of a second after it occurred. The email from your supervisor reads as neutral information to one person and as a threat signal to another, because their subconscious filters have written different stories around identical words. Learning to identify your initial interpretive story, evaluate its accuracy, and consciously choose a more useful frame is not self-deception. It is sophisticated cognition, the kind that elite performers practice deliberately until it becomes automatic. The long-term practice of emotional regulation produces a quality of inner stability that most people have never experienced because they have never trained for it. A baseline equanimity that is not the absence of emotion but the absence of being controlled by it. People who have developed this capacity often describe it as having access to a quiet center that remains undisturbed even when the surface of their experience is turbulent. This is not detachment or indifference. It is the mature form of emotional intelligence, fully present with what is real, fully capable of feeling everything that is worth feeling, and fully capable of choosing the response that serves both the moment and the longer arc of what matters most. This quality, steady, clear, responsive rather than reactive, is what the people around you will remember most. It is the foundation of genuine leadership, genuine relationship, and the kind of sustained excellence that compounds into a life well lived. A practical note on developing emotional regulation under conditions of extreme stress. The techniques described in this chapter, labeling, physiological intervention, reframing, are skills that require prior development to be available when you need them most. Like all skills, they are most accessible in situations that are challenging but manageable and least accessible in situations of acute overwhelm, precisely when they are most needed. This is why the daily conditioning practice matters so deeply. The morning practice of intentional emotional check-in, the daily practice of precise labeling in low-stakes moments, the consistent use of physiological regulation techniques as proactive tools rather than emergency measures. All of this builds the neural pathways that make these capabilities automatic under pressure. You cannot practice a fire drill in the middle of a fire. Build the capability in the calm so it is available in the storm. Strategic thinking. How the best minds play chess while others play checkers. There is a pattern that runs through virtually every significant success story in American business, sports, science, politics, and the arts. And it has nothing to do with working harder, getting luckier, or being more naturally gifted than the competition. It is the practice of thinking at a different level, of seeing not just the immediate situation, but the system it belongs to. Not just today's problem, but the position its solution creates for the next 10 moves. Not just what is urgent, but what is important. This is strategic thinking, and it is a trainable skill, not an innate trait. The foundation of strategic thinking is the ability to simultaneously hold multiple time horizons in your awareness. The immediate tactical reality of what is happening right now, the medium-term trajectory of where current patterns are heading, and the long-term destination that represents your most important goals. Most people operate almost entirely in the first horizon. They manage what is urgent right now, react to what emerges today, and wonder why. Despite constant effort and genuine hard work, their fundamental position rarely seems to improve. They are busy playing not to lose. Strategic thinkers are playing to win, and they are playing a different, longer, more sophisticated game. First principles reasoning is the foundational tool of strategic thinking. The practice of stripping a problem or situation down to its most irreducible verified truths and reconstructing your understanding from that foundation rather than from conventional wisdom, industry assumption, or inherited belief. Most thinking begins with analogy. What have people in similar situations done before? Analogy-based reasoning is efficient and often adequate. But for the problems that matter most, the ones where conventional approaches are producing suboptimal results, the ones where breakthrough is possible if you can find it, analogy-based reasoning will lead you to solutions that are, at best, incrementally better than what already exists. First principles. Reasoning opens up the possibility space entirely. Second-order thinking is the habit of following your decisions through their downstream consequences before you commit to them. Asking not just, what will this produce immediately, but, and then what? And then what after that? Most decisions feel correct when evaluated by their first-order effect. Their true costs and benefits only become visible 1 or 2 steps downstream. A job offer that seems clearly correct when evaluated by salary looks different when evaluated by its effect on your health 3 years of those hours later, and different still when evaluated by its effect on the relationships and personal development that make the salary meaningful in the first place. Asking, and then what, after every significant decision consistently is simple. The compounding effect of that simplicity over a career and a life is extraordinary. The Pareto principle, the empirical observation, documented across an enormous range of natural and human systems, that roughly 20% of inputs tend to generate roughly 80% of outputs, is one of the most practically transformative mental models available. In any honest audit of your professional activities, a small number of tasks, relationships, decisions, and investments are generating the vast majority of your meaningful results. The rest is necessary maintenance at best, wasteful busywork at worst. Identifying your genuine 20% and ruthlessly restructuring your life to maximize your time in that territory is not a time management hack. It is a fundamental strategic reorientation. Inversion thinking, the practice of approaching a problem from its opposite end, asking what would guarantee failure rather than what would produce success, illuminates risks, blind spots, and critical vulnerabilities that forward-focused thinking systematically misses. When you clearly understand what would definitely destroy the thing you are trying to build, you can design systems and habits and commitments that make those failure modes structurally impossible rather than merely unintended. Scenario planning, the practice of developing multiple plausible futures and thinking through how you would respond to each, is a discipline that most individuals never develop because it requires spending mental energy on situations that have not yet materialized and may never do so. But the leaders and organizations that navigate uncertainty most effectively consistently report that the quality of their scenario thinking is a primary driver of their resilience. They are not surprised by adversity because they have already thought carefully about multiple forms it might take, and they have pre-committed to specific responses. This does not mean living in anxiety about imagined futures. It means developing the kind of prepared flexibility that allows you to move quickly and confidently when circumstances change, while others are still processing the shock of the unexpected. Opportunity cost thinking is the mental model that most radically transforms resource allocation decisions once it becomes habitual. Every choice you make, whether about time, money, attention, or energy, implicitly eliminates alternative uses of that resource. The fully loaded cost of any decision is not merely what it requires. It includes what it prevents. The hour spent in an unproductive meeting is not merely an hour of your time. It is an hour of your peak cognitive window that could have been applied to your most important work. The year spent in a role that is not developing you is not merely a year of income. It is a year of skill and network development that compounding could have begun building. When you begin systematically asking, what is this choice preventing? Alongside, what is this choice producing? Your resource allocation decisions improve dramatically, and the aggregate effect of consistently better resource allocation, sustained over years, is an extraordinary divergence from the path you were previously on. Mental resilience, building an unshakable inner foundation. Mental resilience is not toughness in the old-fashioned performative sense. The suppression of vulnerability, the refusal to acknowledge difficulty, the relentless projection of invulnerability that costs enormous psychological energy to maintain and produces the kind of brittle person who fractures spectacularly under sufficient pressure precisely because they spent all their resources maintaining the pretense of being unaffected. That is not resilience. That is armor. And armor is heavy, limiting, and ultimately futile. True mental resilience is something different and far more powerful. It is the capacity to remain fundamentally stable at your core while adapting intelligently to whatever the surface of your life presents. The ability to feel the full weight of what is happening, including grief, fear, disappointment, and genuine pain, without being defined or controlled by it. The capacity to be moved without being swept away. This kind of resilience does not make hard things feel easy. It makes hard things survivable, processable, and ultimately useful in ways that enrich rather than diminish you. The first pillar of resilience is internal locus of control. The operating belief that your response to circumstances matters more in the long run than the circumstances themselves. This is not a naive stance, and it is not about denying the reality of structural disadvantage or genuine bad fortune. It is a strategic allocation of mental resources. The external world will always contain things you cannot control. Market conditions, other people's behavior, economic cycles, health events, accidents of timing and geography. You can spend enormous mental energy on those variables, or you can redirect that energy to the variables entirely within your sphere of influence, your preparation, your response, your choices, your persistence, your learning, your next action. Resilient people do not ignore what they cannot control. They simply refuse to let it consume resources that belong on the controllable side of the ledger. This is a practiced discipline, not a natural disposition. And its compound effect over years is the difference between people who feel fundamentally empowered in the face of adversity and people who feel fundamentally victimized by it. The second pillar is meaning-making, the capacity to extract value, growth, or purpose from your experiences, including and especially the painful ones. Viktor Frankl, the Viennese psychiatrist who survived Auschwitz and 3 other Nazi concentration camps, documented in his landmark work that the people who survived the most extreme circumstances were not always the physically strongest or the most resourceful. They were the ones who could find or create a reason that their survival mattered. This finding has been replicated in clinical research on cancer patients, trauma survivors, professional athletes recovering from career-ending injuries, and entrepreneurs rebuilding after catastrophic failure. Meaning does not eliminate pain. It transforms its relationship to identity. The third pillar is physical foundation, because the brain and body are not separate systems that occasionally influence each other around the margins. They are one integrated biological system, and the mental subsystem is entirely dependent on the condition of the biological platform it runs on. Research from the University of California, San Francisco has documented that even mild chronic sleep restriction produces cognitive impairments that subjects in this state consistently rate as adequate, because impaired judgment is among the first casualties of insufficient sleep. Regular cardiovascular exercise increases the production of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which directly supports neurogenesis, cognitive flexibility, and the capacity to learn from and adapt to new challenges. Your physical habits are not separate from your mental performance. They are its biological substrate. The concept of anti-fragility, introduced by scholar and risk analyst Nassim Nicholas Taleb, offers a more sophisticated and useful framework for thinking about resilience than the conventional notion of bouncing back. A fragile system breaks under stress. A robust system resists stress. An anti-fragile system actually improves under stress. It requires volatility and difficulty to develop its fullest capabilities, the way a muscle requires resistance to grow stronger, or an immune system requires exposure to pathogens to develop comprehensive immunity. Mental anti-fragility is not merely the ability to survive adversity. It is the capacity to emerge from adversity with capabilities, perspectives, and strengths that were not accessible before the adversity occurred. This reframe transforms the relationship with difficulty from something to be managed and minimized to something to be engaged with strategically. Because difficulty, the right kind, in the right doses, navigated with the right tools, is the primary raw material of human growth. Social connection as a pillar of resilience is frequently underestimated in American culture, where self-reliance and independence are highly valued, and the need for support from others can feel like evidence of inadequacy. But the research is unambiguous. Social isolation is one of the most powerful predictors of poor mental and physical health outcomes, and strong social connection is one of the most powerful buffers against the negative effects of stress. The key distinction is between connections that provide genuine support, honest perspective, genuine encouragement grounded in reality, accountability to your stated values, the experience of being truly known and accepted by people who also hold you to your highest standards, and connections that provide false comfort, validation of your limitations, permission to remain stuck, shared resignation that the situation cannot change. The former builds resilience. The latter erodes it quietly, because it removes both the challenge and the support that resilience requires. Building resilience requires deliberate exposure to progressively challenging difficulty in controlled conditions. You do not become resilient by avoiding hard things. You become resilient by navigating them successfully with sufficient frequency that your nervous system updates its model of your capability. The goal is not to become someone who does not feel fear, grief, or disappointment. The goal is to become someone who feels all of those things fully and keeps moving anyway. Breaking the chains. How to dismantle limiting beliefs. Right now, operating beneath the surface of your conscious awareness is a collection of beliefs about what you are capable of, about what kinds of results are available to someone with your history, your background, your track record of attempts and outcomes. These beliefs do not present themselves as beliefs. They present themselves as facts about the world and about you. They feel like honest self-knowledge rather than what they actually are. Interpretations generated years or decades ago from limited data by a mind not yet equipped to evaluate them critically. Limiting beliefs are the invisible architecture of chronic underperformance. They operate like a psychological thermostat. Whenever your performance begins to rise toward the upper boundary of what your programming considers appropriate for you, the system activates corrective mechanisms, unconscious avoidance, manufactured obstacles, sudden mysterious loss of motivation, self-sabotage that comes from nowhere and feels completely irrational, that bring your results back down to the level the thermostat considers normal. The thermostat does not respond to your conscious intentions. It maintains the temperature the programming has set. And until the programming is changed, the temperature does not change. The most common limiting beliefs circulating in the American professional population tend to cluster around a few core themes. Beliefs about deserving, about capability, about identity, and about safety. Each of these is a story, not a fact. A story constructed from selective evidence, filtered through the confirmation bias of a mind that will work to prove whatever it already believes. And like all stories, it can be rewritten. The dismantling process has 4 stages. The first is identification through pattern examination. Look at the areas of your life where you consistently produce outcomes you do not want, or consistently fail to produce outcomes you genuinely want despite genuine effort. Behind every persistent pattern is a belief generating it. Ask yourself, what would I have to believe about myself, about the world, or about what is possible in order for this pattern to make complete sense? The belief will reveal itself in the answer. The second stage is origin investigation. Trace the belief back to its source. When was it formed? In what context? By whom or through what experience? When examined with adult clarity, most limiting beliefs reveal themselves as the conclusions of a younger, less informed, less experienced version of you. And the authority they carry is entirely borrowed from a past that no longer applies. The third stage is evidence auditing. Your mind has been selectively gathering evidence that confirms the limiting belief for years, possibly decades, while systematically discounting evidence that contradicts it. Deliberately reverse this process. Document in writing every instance you can recall, however small, where the evidence contradicts the limiting belief. Build a case for the alternative. Give your subconscious material to work with. The fourth stage is active replacement through visualization, intentional self-talk, and most critically, action in spite of the old belief. Every time you take an action that is only consistent with the new empowering belief, not consistent with the limiting one, you create real-world evidence that the old programming cannot argue with. Evidence is the language the subconscious understands. Build enough of it and the thermostat resets. Your beliefs are not your identity. They are software. And software can be updated by anyone with the tools and the willingness to do the work. Decision-making mastery, the architecture of excellent choices. Your life, examined with complete honesty, is the accumulated output of every decision you have ever made, and, equally, every decision you avoided making, not just the milestone decisions that felt significant in the moment. The micro decisions, what you gave your attention to this morning, before you had fully woken up, how you responded internally to the first difficulty of the day, whether you executed on the commitment you made to yourself last week or quietly renegotiated it with rationalizations that felt reasonable in the moment. The compound effect of these daily micro-decisions, operating over months and years, produces the results that most people attribute to talent, luck, or circumstance. Decision-making mastery is not the achievement of perfect decisions. Perfect decisions do not exist because the future is genuinely uncertain, information is always incomplete, and the best available choice at the time of making it sometimes turns out badly for reasons that were not foreseeable. Mastery is the cultivation of a systematic process that, applied consistently over many decisions, produces better outcomes than reactive, emotion-driven, bias-saturated choosing, and continuously improves through honest assessment of what worked and what did not. The single highest leverage upgrade to your decision-making process is establishing explicit criteria before you evaluate options. The human brain, left to its own devices, evaluates options through a dense thicket of cognitive biases that evolved for a very different world and produce systematic distortions in modern contexts. Anchoring bias causes the first piece of information you encounter about a decision to disproportionately shape all subsequent evaluation. Availability bias causes you to weight options and risks that come easily to mind more heavily than those that are harder to recall. Present bias causes you to systematically overvalue immediate benefits and undervalue future ones, producing the universal human tendency to choose the comfortable option now over the optimal option later. Establishing criteria in advance, before you have encountered any specific option and before your emotions are engaged by the particulars of a choice, creates a filter that operates outside the reach of these biases. What am I actually trying to accomplish with this decision? What does success look like in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years? What are my genuine non-negotiables? Answering these questions before evaluating options is the difference between choosing with your compass and choosing with your appetites. The reversibility framework provides a simple, powerful heuristic for allocating your decision-making resources appropriately. Some decisions can be easily reversed if they prove suboptimal. For these, speed is often more valuable than thoroughness. Choose quickly, implement, gather feedback, and adjust as needed. Other decisions create consequences that are difficult or impossible to reverse. For these, invest more time, gather more information, consult more trusted perspectives, and think through downstream consequences carefully. Applying your most rigorous decision-making process to every decision is both exhausting and unnecessary. Applying it to the decisions that warrant it and moving quickly on the ones that do not is strategic resource management. The 10-10-10 method, asking how you will feel about each available option in 10 minutes, 10 months, and 10 years, is a simple tool for creating temporal perspective that consistently reveals options that feel compelling in the short term but are clearly suboptimal over a longer horizon, and options that feel uncomfortable in the short term but obviously correct over time. Perhaps the single most important meta-principle of decision-making mastery. Not deciding is always a decision. The choice to delay, to keep options open, to wait for more certainty or better timing. This is not a neutral pause. It is a choice with consequences, often significant ones. In many situations, the most expensive decision available is the refusal to make one. Recognizing this transforms your relationship with uncertainty because it removes the false comfort of postponement and makes clear that the relevant question is never, "Should I decide now?" but always, "What is the best available decision given current information?" The architecture of unstoppable habits. 24 centuries ago, Aristotle observed that we are what we repeatedly do. Modern neuroscience has confirmed this insight with a precision Aristotle could not have imagined, revealing the exact biological mechanism that makes it true, and more importantly, showing exactly how to use that mechanism intentionally rather than experiencing its effects accidentally. Your habits, the behaviors you perform repeatedly, automatically in consistent contexts, are not merely patterns you engage in. At the neurological level, they are the dominant structure of your daily experience, your cognitive identity, and your long-term outcomes. The current state of your health, your finances, your most important relationships, your professional capabilities, and the quality of your daily emotional life are, in the aggregate, the compound output of your habitual behavior. This is either the most discouraging insight in this book or the most empowering one, depending entirely on what you do with it. The path forward is not trying harder with the habits you have. It is designing better habits with the architecture neuroscience provides. The habit loop, the three-component neural cycle that encodes and automates any repeated behavior, consists of a cue that triggers the routine itself, and the reward that reinforces the loop. When this cycle is activated repeatedly in the same context, the basal ganglia encodes the sequence as a unit, progressively automating it until it executes with minimal conscious initiation. This is the mechanism that makes established habits feel effortless. It is also the mechanism that makes them extraordinarily resistant to suppression, because suppression is a prefrontal cortex function and habits are a basal ganglia function, and the basal ganglia operates faster, below conscious awareness, and does not respond to intention. Implementation intentions, the "when X occurs, then I will do Y" format for specifying when and how a habit will be executed, represent the most robustly validated intervention in the habit change research literature. A meta-analysis of over 90 studies found that people who formed implementation intentions were 2 to 3 times more likely to follow through on intended behaviors than people who had equivalent motivation without the specific when-then specification. By pre-deciding the precise context and timing of a behavior, you offload the initiation decision from your in-the-moment prefrontal cortex, where it competes with fatigue and competing demands, to a pre-committed plan that executes when the specified conditions occur. Minimum viable behavior is the design principle that most well-intentioned habit builders violate by thinking too ambitiously in the installation phase. The nervous system does not resist changing a behavior because the destination is wrong. It resists because the change activates too much novelty, discomfort, and cognitive load in the initial attempts, triggering the threat response that generates avoidance. Make the initial behavior so small that the only reasonable response is to do it. The difficulty is the establishment, not the extension. Habit stacking, the technique of attaching a new habit to an immediately preceding established one, leverages the neurological reality that existing habits have strong, well-groomed neural pathways with highly reliable cues. By anchoring a new behavior to an existing one, you borrow the reliability of the established cue and the automaticity of the existing loop to provide scaffolding for the new behavior while its own neural pathway is being built. The formula is precise. After I current habit, I will immediately new habit. After I pour my morning coffee, I will open my journal. After I sit down at my desk, I will write one sentence of my most important project. After I park my car at work, I will listen to one chapter of a professional development audio. Each of these pairings uses the established habit as a launch pad, dramatically reducing the activation energy required for the new behavior. The compound arithmetic of habit improvement is worth sitting with long enough for its implications to fully land. A 1% daily improvement, a nearly invisible increment, the kind that requires no dramatic effort and produces no immediate visible result, compounds to a 37-fold improvement over 1 year. A 1% daily decline compounds to a performance level that is about 97% below where you started. The trajectory is everything, not the current position, not the single-day effort, the direction and consistency of movement over time. This is why two people who appear to be at similar performance levels today can end up in radically different places 5 years from now, not because of different talent or effort, but because of different daily habits compounding in different directions. The habits you build today are not merely tools for today. They are the seeds of the person you will be and the life you will be living in 5, 10, 20 years. Build them accordingly. Identity-based framing is the deepest and most durable approach to habit formation because it targets not the behavior itself, but the self-concept that generates the behavior. Every action you take is either a confirmation of a self-concept or a contradiction of it. Enough confirmations of the right identity, sustained over sufficient time, and that identity becomes real. And the habits it generates become as natural and effortless as the old ones once were. Mental execution. Closing the gap between knowing and doing. There is a specific, identifiable point in the journey of nearly every intelligent, motivated person where their development stalls, where the acquisition of knowledge continues, but the translation of that knowledge into results they want does not. They understand the principles. They have attended the seminars, read the books, hired the coaches, and consumed the content. They could describe, with accuracy and sophistication, exactly what they should be doing differently. And yet, in the texture of their actual days, things largely continue as they were. The gap between knowing and doing is not a knowledge problem. It is an execution problem. Mental execution, the trained capacity to translate intention into action reliably, repeatedly, and under varying conditions, including the conditions least favorable to action, is a skill. It is trainable, developable, and improvable through the same disciplined practice that improves any other skill. And like all skills, it begins with understanding the mechanism rather than simply trying harder. Bias toward action is the foundational operating principle. When sufficient information exists to take a meaningful step, not complete information, which never exists, but sufficient information, the default response of the high performer is to move. Not to wait for certainty, not to gather one more piece of data, not to refine the plan one more time, to act, observe what happens, and integrate the feedback into the next action. Perfect planning without execution produces no results. Imperfect execution with learning produces compound results that eventually produce mastery. The most important task discipline, identifying the night before, the single action that would move your most consequential current project forward more than any other available action, and then executing that task in the first protected window of the next day before the reactive demands of the world establish their claim on your attention, is the most practically transformative daily execution practice available. Not because it produces dramatic single-day results, because it creates a daily habit of prioritization that, compounded over a year, means that your most important work receives consistent, high-quality attention rather than the fragmented, leftover, end-of-day attention most people give to the work that matters most. Energy alignment. The practice of matching the quality of your cognitive resources to the demands of your tasks by scheduling your most demanding work during your peak neurological performance windows is a structural intervention that can improve the quantity and quality of your important output more than virtually any other time management practice. Most people have a peak performance window of 2 to 4 hours, typically in the morning. Most people spend this window on low cognitive demand tasks while doing their most important work in the cognitively degraded hours that remain. Reversing this pattern is not about working more hours. It is about deploying your hours in alignment with your neurobiology. Accountability architecture, external systems that create social or financial consequences for execution failures, is a force multiplier that most people dramatically underutilize because it requires admitting that their internal motivation is insufficient. It is insufficient for everyone. Even the most disciplined performers in the world use accountability coaches, commitments, public pledges, and structural constraints to support their execution. This is not weakness. It is the intelligent application of behavioral science to your own performance. Resistance as diagnostic data is the reframe that transforms the execution experience of setbacks from demoralizing to instructive. Every execution plan encounters obstacles. The question that separates people who compound their results over time from those who plateau is not whether they face resistance. They all do, without exception, but what they make of it. Resistance is precise information. It points to the specific friction, the specific misalignment, the specific skill gap or structural obstacle that stands between your current execution capacity and the result you want. Read the resistance as a map rather than a verdict. Make the specific adjustment it points to, and execute again. Recovery and sustainability deserve equal billing with drive and intensity in any honest account of what separates people who execute at high levels over the long term from those who burn brightly for a season and then collapse. The American professional culture has a troubling tendency to celebrate unsustainable intensity. The 80-hour week, the no days off grind, the sacrifice of everything else on the altar of a single goal, as evidence of admirable commitment. But the research on performance across domains consistently shows the opposite. The highest long-term output comes not from the people who push hardest without rest, but from those who alternate periods of intense focused effort with genuine deliberate recovery. Adequate sleep, physical movement, time in nature, creative activities pursued purely for enjoyment, and genuine connection with people they love. These are not distractions from peak performance. They are its biological infrastructure. Sustainable execution is not a compromise of excellence. It is its prerequisite. The integrated mind, living at the level of your potential. There comes a point in the development of any genuine capability where a qualitative shift occurs, not a marginal improvement on the continuum of what existed before, but a genuine phase transition into a different mode of operation altogether. The techniques you have been consciously practicing begin to dissolve into the background of who you are, the way that a skilled jazz musician eventually stops thinking about chord theory and simply plays. The deliberate becomes intuitive. The effortful becomes effortless. The framework becomes invisible because it has been absorbed into the structure of your perception, your response to difficulty, your way of moving through the world. This is the destination this entire book has been building toward. Not a collection of techniques you apply when you remember to, but an integrated way of being that you inhabit continuously. A mind so thoroughly trained that its default responses under pressure, in complexity, in the face of setbacks and opportunities and everything in between, are the responses of someone operating at the top of their capability. Not because you are performing high performance, because that is genuinely neurologically, habitually who you have become. Consider what this integration looks like in the actual texture of a high-stakes moment. A senior partner at a Chicago law firm, let's call her Rachel, receives a call on a Wednesday afternoon informing her that the firm's largest client is conducting a strategic review that may result in moving their account to a competitor. 18 months ago, this call would have triggered an immediate cortisol cascade, reactive decision-making driven by fear and ego, and a series of escalating responses that would likely have communicated exactly the desperation and instability that concerns clients most. Today, something categorically different happens. The threat signal registers fully. Rachel does not suppress or minimize what is at stake, but it does not hijack. Her emotional regulation practice activates automatically, creating the space for her rational mind to engage before any response is made. Her strategic thinking moves in immediately, not with the reactive question, "What do I do right now to stop this?" but with the more powerful question, "What is actually driving this? What position do I want to be in 3 moves from now? And what response to this moment creates that position?" Her resilience framework reframes the situation from a threat to a test. One that, handled well, might actually produce a stronger and more durable client relationship than existed before the challenge. Her execution discipline converts this analysis into a clear, specific, high-quality next action within minutes. She makes the call. She is excellent. The client stays. No individual technique produced that outcome. The integration did. When every component of a complete mental training system functions as a unified whole, emotional regulation providing the stability, focus mastery providing the precision, strategic thinking providing the perspective, resilience providing the courage, execution mastery providing the momentum, and foundational beliefs providing the self-concept that sustains the entire structure. The result is something that most observers would call impressive. To Rachel, it simply feels like Wednesday afternoon. The developmental journey to this integration follows stages that every serious practitioner passes through. In the early stage, you develop conscious incompetence. You begin to see the patterns in your thinking, emotional responses, and behavior that were previously invisible. This is simultaneously uncomfortable and essential. You cannot change what you cannot see. The discomfort of early awareness is not a sign that something is going wrong. It is confirmation that your capacity for honest observation is growing. The intermediate stage brings conscious competence. You know how to apply the tools and you apply them, but it requires deliberate effort and attention. Old patterns reassert themselves under stress or fatigue. Progress is real but not yet automatic. This is the stage that most separates those who ultimately achieve integration from those who plateau. The willingness to continue practicing through the awkward, effortful middle period that precedes natural competence. Most people who begin this training reach the intermediate stage and stop, not because they have failed, but because this still requires effort feels in a world of promised quick fixes. Like evidence that the approach is not working. It is not. It is evidence that real capability development is in progress. The advanced stage, unconscious competence, genuine integration, is where the investment pays its compound returns. The new patterns are now the default. The old ones feel foreign, like remembering a version of yourself you have clearly outgrown. The capabilities that once required conscious deployment are simply available, automatically as needed. The gap between who you are and who you are capable of being has closed, not completely, because human potential has no visible ceiling, but enough that the difference is measurable in your results, your relationships, and the quality of your daily experience. The world, right now, is facing challenges that require precisely the capabilities this training develops. Problems of extraordinary complexity, requiring clear thinking sustained over long time periods. Social and organizational challenges requiring the kind of emotional intelligence that most leadership development programs touch, but rarely build at a deep level. Decisions with enormous second and third order consequences, requiring the kind of strategic thinking that goes beyond immediate optimization. The people best equipped to contribute meaningfully to these challenges are not the ones with the highest credentials or the most information. They are the ones with the best trained minds, the ones who can think clearly under pressure, sustain focus through complexity, regulate their emotions in high-stakes situations, and execute with discipline and persistence on the things that actually matter. The development of your mental mastery is not a personal indulgence. It is your most direct path to genuine, lasting impact. A final word about the relationship between mental mastery and meaning. One of the most consistent findings across the research on peak performance, across cultures and contexts and generations, is that the highest and most sustained levels of human achievement are produced not by the pursuit of achievement itself, but by the pursuit of something meaningful through achievement. The person who trains their mind purely to win, to accumulate advantage, to outperform competitors, to secure external validation, will typically reach a ceiling because external motivation is inherently variable and ultimately insufficient as a sustaining fuel for the daily practice that mastery requires. The person who trains their mind because they are deeply committed to something larger than themselves, to the work they believe they were put here to do, to the people they love and want to serve more fully, to the contribution they want to make to something that will outlast them, discovers that motivation is the wrong word for what drives them. It is not motivation. It is identity. And identity never runs out. Here is your 90-day implementation roadmap. In days 1 through 30, establish the non-negotiable foundation. A morning priming practice of 10 to 15 minutes, phone in another room. That includes intentional goal setting, visualization of the day's performance, and deliberate self-talk. 3 25-minute focus blocks per day, built progressively from 1 in week 1 to 3 by week 4, with your phone removed from your workspace. A 5-minute end-of-day review asking, what did I execute? What did I avoid? What is tomorrow's most important task? Do not add anything else this month. These 3 practices, executed without exception, will produce detectable changes in your mental performance within 10 to 14 days. In days 31 through 60, layer in emotional regulation and habit architecture. Begin labeling your emotional states with precision 3 times daily regardless of intensity. Introduce one physiological regulation tool, the double inhale-exhale, a 10-minute walk or a brief body scan, and use it proactively before high-stakes interactions rather than reactively after you've already been hijacked. Design one keystone habit using an implementation intention, minimum viable behavior, and environmental redesign. In days 61 through 90, begin your belief audit. Identify the one limiting belief most directly constraining your progress in your most important domain. Apply the 4-stage dismantling process. Begin applying one strategic thinking framework, first principles reasoning or second-order thinking, to one current challenge per week. Review the entire program and identify the 2 or 3 practices producing the most leverage for you specifically. Double down on those. By the end of 90 days, the person who completes this program will be measurably and genuinely different from the person who began it. Not because of something magical, because 90 days of deliberate, consistent, progressive mental training produces the same kind of real structural change in your brain that 90 days of deliberate, consistent physical training produces in your body. The mechanism is the same. The principle is the same. The result is the same. A capability that you will carry with you for the rest of your life, that will compound in value with every passing year, and that, because so few people ever commit to this kind of training, will distinguish you from virtually everyone around you in every room you enter for the rest of your career. The question is never whether you can do this. 40 years of neuroscience confirms unambiguously that you can. The question has always been the same question, and it is yours right now, in this moment. Will you begin? Every master was once a beginner, standing exactly where you are, holding exactly the same question. The difference between the ones who became masters and the ones who remained curious observers was not talent. It was not timing. It was not circumstance. It was a single decision: to start before they felt ready, to continue after it became uncomfortable, and to trust that the person they would become through the practice was worth the investment the practice required. That decision is available to you right now. Your mind is waiting for your instructions. Your potential is waiting to be claimed. The competitive edge has always been yours. It begins the moment you decide to train for it. One last thought before you close this book and open the rest of your life. The culture we live in has an extraordinary appetite for transformation that happens fast. The overnight success. The one insight that changes everything. The shortcut that delivers extraordinary results without the work that ordinary paths require. This appetite is understandable. And it is worth confronting honestly, because believing in it, even slightly, even unconsciously, will undermine the training you are about to begin. Mental mastery is not fast. Neither is physical mastery, financial mastery, or mastery of any craft worth mastering. It is built in the same way that every durable thing is built, one day at a time, one decision at a time, one practice session at a time, with the patient understanding that the compound effect of consistent small efforts, sustained over sufficient time, produces outcomes that look, from the outside, to people who only see the finished product, like extraordinary talent or extraordinary luck. They are neither. They are the inevitable result of extraordinary commitment to a process that most people start and few people finish. You now have the process. The science behind it is solid. The tools are proven. The roadmap is clear. What determines everything from this moment is simply what you do next, not eventually, not when the timing is better, not after you have thought about it some more. Now. The first step of the 90-day program can begin within the next 24 hours. The morning priming practice requires 5 minutes and nothing else. The first focus block requires 25 minutes and a place to sit without your phone. The end-of-day review requires a notebook and 5 quiet minutes before sleep. The investment is minimal. The return, compounded over a year and a decade and a lifetime of consistent practice, is everything.